Oops.
You're in.
I'm in. Is that too loud?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I hold up your book?
Yep.
Okay. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm not.
And I can adjust those. Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see all of you in the library. My name is Troy Swanson. I'm the library department chair. We are doing a series of fun events this fall, and also, I think, scholarly events about pop culture and thinking about pop culture. And we have an internal expert on our faculty who just published a brand new book called Star Trek Discovery and the Female Gothic. If you don't know what that means, I think we're about to find out what that means. And this is Carey Millsap-Spears, who teaches literature, writing, and is a good friend of ours and has spoken many times in our library, and we're always happy to have her back. It's exciting to have our faculty who are scholars, who spend their time researching and writing and thinking and sharing ideas out there in the greater scholarly enterprise. It's great to have them come into our library and share their ideas and talk about what they do and what they think about and how they connect that in with our society and our classes and our students. So Carey, thank you for your scholarship and your time and doing this for us today. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you all for being here.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Troy.
Stealing your book.
Oh, no, I can just go on the. Okay.
And we do have the book in our collection if you want to check it out and take it home.
All right. So thank you all for being here today. I just wanted to let you know a little bit before we get started what this is all going to be about. So I know some of you may have not been in the library before for a presentation, so I kind of want to frame that up for you a little bit. And think about what you might want to take away from today. First, I want to thank the library for the time and the space to do this. I think it's really important that we have a place to talk about important and timely topics and for our campus and the larger community. I also want to thank the Liberal Arts Department, my colleagues and friends who are here, and to our interlibrary loan librarian, Sue. I don't know if she's here today, but she is amazing. So I want to thank everyone and thank you all for being here. So what is this all about? Well, it's about Star Trek, and it's also not about Star Trek. And one of the things I want to kind of help you understand a little bit about this presentation is how you can tie it into the work that you are already doing in some of your classes. So this presentation really hopes to illustrate how using popular culture can help students meet their course outcomes and also have success in their classes, and to shape things around them in meaningful ways. And I wanted to show you this through my example, what I can do with this particular text, and also hopefully you can link it to other texts that you are working with in other classes. It's also about the power of popular culture. Popular culture shapes the present and also the past. Today we're going to talk about one of the most iconic pieces of popular culture in the last 60 years. It began as an expansionist Western, a wagon train to the stars, but at the same time became a champion of diversity and inclusion from its inception in 1968. Star Trek often talks about things that are scary and terrifying to the characters, but they must be brave to face the dangers. And so these are some of the captains from the various series of Star Trek, depending on how you count the series. If you include the animated series, of which there are 3 now, we're up to 9 Star Trek series. There are 13 feature films, and so we're not going to talk about all of those today, but if you want to, I'm up for that. But these captains are iconic in also letting us know that we have to be brave in the face of adversity, and so we're also looking at the future with that positivity in mind as well. And one of the things that is really important that Star Trek Discovery highlights is the idea that we will tell fear no. This is Captain Michael Burnham, and she is the Gothic heroine of the series, which I'll discuss that in a minute. So before we go any further, however, I really want us all to understand how important this is, especially in our online world. In science fiction, there has been a lot of toxic fan cultures and a lot of toxicity online relating to new science fiction series not just Star Trek, but others, that have told stories that were relatable to women, girls, people of color, and LGBTQ folks. Discovery is not the first series to feature the work of women, however. In the original series, had episodes written by a woman named DC Fontana, and female-identified fans actually created the fan culture that still remains. So I just want to point this out because Star Trek has always told these stories, and they relate to all humanity, regardless of what you might see online. So for my Com 102 students who are here today, why this matters to you, hopefully you can kind of see what our class will look like as we enter the midterm era. I use critical thinking skills throughout the class, and in order to do that with texts, I use different kinds of assignments. So we use these to achieve our course competencies, of course, but this semester so far we've used poetry, personal essays, a few visual images, and try to think one other thing. Oh, a definition. You will soon have an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, okay? And that will also work just how I'm going to illustrate the series of Star Trek Discovery just now. So this is a big change for many of us, since some students have only experienced novels or short stories in language arts courses in high school. Ultimately, all texts are useful in some way, but for me, using films, TV, advertisements, memes, and so on, levels the playing field for all of us. College itself is a new environment with new standards. And if we're going to talk about popular culture, one of the reasons popular culture is really important is that it levels those playing fields for all of us. Ray Brown, one of the main scholars who ushered in the field of popular culture studies, says it is a way of life in which and by which most people in this society, in any society, live. In a democracy like the United States, it is the voice of the people, their likes and dislikes that form the lifeblood of daily existence, a way of life. It is the everyday world around us, the mass media, the entertainments and diversions. It is our heroes, icons, rituals, everyday actions, psychology, and religion, our total life picture. At the heart of popular culture studies, Braun continues, is the humanities, the study of the human condition. The humanities have been under attack, and maybe we don't need these courses for jobs, as some might argue. But as many have said before me, maybe we need these courses for life. Think about your comfort television shows, your favorite musicians, your interest in art or dance, or your joy at seeing live theater. All of these things are part of the humanities and help reflect ourselves back to us in some way. Popular culture scholars like me see any cultural artifact, that is TV show, movie, or comic book, as a way of looking at life. So by using texts that anyone can enjoy, in my Com 102 classes, students can achieve these outcomes in a meaningful and fun way. We can break down the concepts of audience, purpose, context, and message within the texts as we can with articles or books. It only takes time and practice and a willingness to try. We all have something we like. Collectibles. Here are some of mine. That's not all of them, by the way. I do have a cabinet in my house. YouTube makeup tutorials, reality television, cult movies, comic book characters, board games, video games, Disneyland, fan conventions, sports teams, musicals, and the list goes on. I don't believe anyone can be left out of this conversation. We all experience popular culture from the morning we first look at our phones until the last seconds before we go to sleep. For me, I love Star Trek. And this is my first full book on Star Trek. I have articles in these books on Star Trek. I also have articles on other series as well, but these are just the ones on Star Trek. I'm going to share a little bit about that book. I am currently working on another book as we speak, not on Star Trek though. So I just want to kind of share with you a little bit about how I'm applying these ideas of research to a popular culture text. In this particular example is Star Trek Discovery. So if you aren't familiar with the whole gamut of Star Trek and you only kind of think you know, like Captain Kirk, things like that, this is a different series, okay? So just kind of hold on, you'll see some pictures from that series as we go along. And I have to tell you, as a lifelong fan of Star Trek, I eagerly awaited the premiere of Discovery in 2017. And from the first episode, I knew I was watching something very different and very special. And it was because of what I'm going to share with you today is known as the Female Gothic. The Female Gothic often appears in castles. Today I'm going to argue that it appears in a spaceship. For my purposes today, I will explain a little bit about this genre and give it a glance, how it works in Star Trek Discovery. I'll also identify some of the scaffolding as presented by some of the scholars from the Female Gothic genre. I will also talk a little bit about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and some of the Gothic romances by Anne Radcliffe. And many of you might be familiar with Frankenstein from high school English classes, for example, but you may have never heard of the writer Anne Radcliffe before. So bear with me, I'll explain some of that as we go along. So the Female Gothic essentially inhabits in contested space, right? For many, the term Female Gothic comes from one place, this particular essay, written in the 1970s by the scholar Ellen Moyers. Literary scholars working there in the Female Gothic say, she says, quote, "The work that women writers have done in the literary mode that since the 18th century we have called the Gothic." And this holds true for the text that she examines by Radcliffe and Shelley. But since that time, much scholarship surrounding the Female Gothic has moved on to some other areas, which we'll talk about. But for our purposes today, we're really going to talk a little bit about the concept of the heroine and the explained supernatural. But the idea that what I mean or what anyone else means by the Gothic is not so easily stated, except that it has to do with fear. And we already know that in Star Trek Discovery, Captain Burnham says that we tell fear no. The construction of this definition really becomes clear when you think about a book like Frankenstein that uses science to create the monster, not magic. And I think that's one of the most important things to kind of consider, because there is much to fear in space, but it is also a scientific exploration. These are scientists flying in a spaceship, right? It's not magic. And that's, I think, one of the key differences. So as Starfleet asks us to be brave, we will, along with the crew of Discovery. So with this structure in mind, Star Trek as a franchise ultimately rests on the Female Gothic. I really argue that as well, because science and technology is at the core of the series. Science and emotion also work together, and Discovery uses this in a new way. So I'll just briefly share with you a couple of quick bullet points on the Female Gothic and science fiction more generally. So if you think about Frankenstein, if that is a book you read in high school English class, you remember there is a man who makes a monster, and the monster runs amok, and the man doesn't take care of the monster, and the end, okay? So you kind of ask me, wait a minute, how is that Female Gothic? Well, a lot of feminist scholars will say that the monster is coded as female, for example. There's also the concept of a monstrous childbirth and the creation of the creature. There's also the monstrous threat of more creatures being made and also the destruction of the creature. So Frankenstein has a unique space in this conversation. I don't have time to unpack it all today, but kind of just bear with me a little bit when I say that if you think about Frankenstein as a novel and you think about the main characters as being coded female, you can kind of see the connections between the heroine. The other thing that you might see in science fiction that really comes from Frankenstein is the othering of female characters. Female and femme characters can be seen as monsters, alien, or other dehumanized characters. So anybody who's a fan of science fiction kind of watch and see who are the feminized characters and how are they represented. So I will show you, here's an image of Commander Detmer, the pilot of the ship Discovery. Detmer was injured in battle early on in the show, and you can see that she has been changed, right? Her face is changed, her eye is changed. She wears a device to allow her to see after her injury. But what's interesting about that is sort of like she becomes a little less human and a little more cybernetic with this particular change to her based on her injury. I do think the character is quite amazing, actually, and really speaks to disability in veterans. But I also think that it also speaks to some of these other issues, as I've mentioned. So for my book in particular, I actually have a chapter on each one of these concepts. No, I'm not going to do all of these today, I promise you. There's a chapter on the Gothic romance, the Gothic heroine, villains, escape narratives, the explained supernatural, and Gothic heroes. Supernatural and the Gothic heroine really go very well together, and I'm going to talk about those two today, but ultimately the Gothic heroine informs all of these other things. So you see in this image, you see Tilly and Stamets, both are scientists, laughing about the power of math to solve a problem on the ship. So that really falls under the explained supernatural, because it's not real math. If you watch the show, they're making things up, but it is explained through science. So for our purposes today, we're going to really focus on the Gothic heroine, Captain Burnham. And for Radcliffe, as I've mentioned, the real dangers that women face appear through the patriarchal systems, not undead beings, not zombies, not vampires. It's the patriarchy. So with this central female character as the focus, she must escape incarceration and or death to achieve her goals. So if you're a fan of other kinds of Gothic media, so slasher films or horror films, you might know these other characters as damsels in distress, and they often die at the hands of a slasher, for example. The Female Gothic flips that. The main character survives and thrives. And so in the end, Radcliffe's heroines solve the terrifying mysteries and the plots and are free to marry the hero of their choice. So female Gothic heroines embody agency, like Starfleet captains do, and Discovery highlights this character through Captain Burnham. Burnham is a Black woman who rises from the depths of a mutineer prison to the captaincy through bold and exciting narratives that employ many of these devices. Michael Burnham has to have mysteries to solve. She has to escape the clutches of the villains, and then she has to lead her crew to safety in every season. She must also confront her own past and also understand that Starfleet structures are a form of patriarchy that she also must escape. Each season of Discovery allows her this narrative opportunity through various character-based arcs and keeps her centered throughout the story. So understanding the nuance of the Female Gothic is really important. I really argue for this series in particular. So the key difference between the Female Gothic and other Gothic narrative forms really rests on the heroine and the explained supernatural. The monsters are real, and the heroine's gonna overcome. So if you've ever watched Scooby-Doo, the monsters are real. At the end, they take off the mask, and it's always Farmer Jones, who was making a ghost somewhere. They aren't real. And so confronting those fears and exposing them for what they are as fabrications is really important for the heroines. And it also shows that the heroines are geniuses. And this was important in the 18th century because women did not have basic human rights when Radcliffe was writing these stories. To show a female character as not only brave, but also smart was an amazing thing that also made these texts so popular. So for Radcliffe and Shelley, and if we include Shelley's discussion of Robert Walton, the characters gain the necessary knowledge that people, not ghosts or vampires or zombies, can be the real monsters. And the heroines and the heroine-like characters bravely confront all these narratives. The main female characters function as these really smart and important characters throughout most of the female Gothic texts, that I've ever read. Sometimes the stories change a little bit from time, but you will see now in more modern versions, you're going to see a little bit more horror kind of coming into some of these stories. But if you just kind of watch the heroine, see what she's doing, and you'll be able to tell the difference. Because some of the forms of the modern multimedia Gothic really straddle the lines between Radcliffe's Gothic romance and horror, like slasher films. So while female Gothic narratives use imagination to terrify the audiences, the female Gothic heroine must confront some of these things. So I have here on the slide that the heroine explores her surroundings, takes risks, and eventually partakes in the romance of her choice after escaping the clutches of the Gothic villain. So you can kind of guess who's the villain in all of these pictures just by the body language presented by Captain Burnham. I'll help you. Not that one. That's the Gothic villain. That's Captain Lorca, actually. I've now spoiled season 1 for you. Do that. But as the series goes on, Captain Burnham is free to not only confront all of the fear, but also have a full life. So with understanding of all of this, we have to really note too that the villains not only are flesh and blood, but the heroine has to uncover who that villain is, because sometimes they don't know at first, because in the case of the one that I've just covered, no one knew until about 6 episodes in, for example. So the Gothic heroine uncovering these things illustrates that women have intellect and the ability to reason and not be ruled by fear. It is the explained supernatural that showcases the genius of Radcliffe's character. Star Trek as a science fiction text really rests on the female Gothic foundation built by Radcliffe and Shelley. The explained supernatural, the sublime, meaning the feeling of looking at space, and wonder and awe, and the narrative focus on interpersonal relationships that offer some, but not complete, escape from patriarchal rules. Discovery pushes this construction further within the confines of the Star Trek franchise with the addition of not only the heroine, but Gothic villains and ineffective Gothic heroes. And we talk a lot about that, about heroes and what that means, because sometimes we think of heroes as Superman or Batman or something like that. Gothic heroes kind of make it through accidentally. They're not, they kind of mess up, and the heroine saves them. So what's really important? So this is a unique series within the Star Trek franchise, which is just celebrated its 58th birthday. September 8 was its 58th anniversary. And this show has really taken a lot of risks and changed that whole paradigm within Star Trek. Star Trek's use of science as a narrative device stems from the female Gothic, since displaying supernatural is a key component of all the plots in the franchise. For David Batchelor from NASA, quote, "Star Trek is intelligently written and more faithful to science than any other science fiction series ever shown on television. Star Trek also attracts and excites generations of viewers and about advanced science and engineering, and it's almost the only show that depicts scientists and engineers positively as role models." You can see these viral images from the International Space Station. This is the Italian astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti aboard the International Space Station. In the one image, she is wearing her Captain Janeway uniform. Captain Janeway is over here on the table if you want to meet her. And she's also, in the second image, she is given the Vulcan form of greeting, which means live long and prosper. She's also has an emblem of Star Trek on her shirt. I have one as well, right here. So you can kind of see that. You can also see the idea of what I mean about this of space. Imagine looking at our own planet from off the planet, how wonderful that would feel. So Star Trek inspires astronauts and engineers and scientists. It also inspires teachers. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Captain Burnham, and it was probably one of my best days ever. So I hope that you were able to find something to think about to help you meet your class goals, and also find some enjoyment in life, and understand that there's lots of life to be lived and lots of things to be studied, and I really hope you find your thing. Thank you.
So I think we have a few minutes for questions, right? Any questions?
Say it again. How old was I? I was 7. And I can tell you the very first episode I watched, it was called Miri from the original series, and it was about a planet inhabited only by children. And I remember that like it was yesterday. I will tell you this, I don't know if my family will watch this YouTube, so I'll tell you the secret. None of them like Star Trek, so they made me watch it on the TV in the other room. But now I have my own house, my own TV, so I can watch it whenever I want.
What's your favorite series or film, or do you have a single favorite of anything that you've already said?
Well, I mean, I don't know. We have 20 minutes. I could probably maybe get off the ground with that in 20 minutes. No, I don't know. Like my favorite, it's difficult to say. I will say the film that I watched the most, and people will know this as I watch Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan pretty regularly, because it is among my most favorite things. So if you want to talk about something that's a comfort, that's one that's a comfort to me. It's also really, really, really a Gothic film in a lot of ways. And so I really enjoy that one. I started watching the original series when it was in syndication. Obviously, I'm not old enough to remember it when it was on television. It wasn't born yet when it first came on television. The first series I watched that was on television was called The Next Generation. I have Deanna Troy from The Next Generation over here on the table. That I watched weekly. So in the olden days, stuff came out weekly, and television had 22 episodes a season. Can you imagine? And that went on for 6 seasons. Or 7, sorry, I'm gonna lose my Trekkie card if I don't remember that. And so the idea that all of that was available, and so I watched all of that as well. So I would say that Next Generation was the first series I watched live on television, and then after that they all started coming. I've enjoyed these new series that have come out in the last 5 to 8 years. I think that they're really amazing, and they're offering new viewers ways to come into the franchise, and I really and I also appreciate Discovery and all of its diversity, and also Strange New Worlds is really doing some great things. Just did a whole musical episode, which was epic, by the way. Everyone was singing on a starship. I am in love. So there's that.
Could you tell us a little bit, just with like pop culture studies? It seems interdisciplinary, like maybe history, maybe sociology, clearly literature. How should we understand this area of research?
Well, it's definitely interdisciplinary. That means people in psychology, sociology, people in education, people in rhetoric and composition studies, people in literary studies. everyone's got a take, essentially. So depending on your frame of reference, you see things a little differently. So I like to think about it as glasses. So if I put my glasses on and I'm looking at it through a perspective of rhetoric and composition, I'm looking at very specific things, like what's the message of this episode? What are the rhetorical appeals of this particular episode? If I'm looking at it through the lens of literary studies, especially within the lens of Gothic studies, I'm looking at it very differently. So sociologists might look at fan cultures, for example, and they would go to Comic-Con and they would interview the people there. And they would say, why are you here? When would you first start watching this show? What's your favorite episode? And why are you dressed up like Spider-Man? They would ask those questions. And so that's what they would do because they study groups. Psychologists might ask people individually to take surveys and things like that to kind of understand better the whole concepts that they're working with. But I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
But it does. It spans everything. So I will tell you, I have met people in every field, including mathematics. I have met astronauts. I have met physicists. And the scientists are the most interested in the humanities that something like Star Trek brings forward, because they understand that it has to be more than just their science. There's some reason that we're doing the science. And so some of those interactions have been amazing to me because they want to know about the human side of these things, not just the technology.
And there are people, and Star Trek is great. I'm a big Star Trek fan, but I don't want everyone to walk away thinking that Star Trek is it, right? Like, people study everything, right? Music,
Yes. Well,
every
Star Trek
show.
is it, by the way. No. No, they study everything. Star Wars, they study Star Wars. They study everything. So I've met people who study the Beatles. I've met people who study, classic television, like I Love Lucy. I have met people who study video games, in particular, like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I've seen like 3 presentations on that video game in particular within historical studies. People study all different kinds of things. So pick your text, people study it, and you would be amazed at what they do with it. It's more than just being a fan and saying, oh, I love this thing. I think I'm in a unique position because I've always loved this thing. Like, it's always been my thing. But then as I started looking at it as a scholar, I had to acknowledge some of the problems with it. So the original series has a lot of problems. There are some problems in there. The Next Generation has some problems. Even into Star Trek Voyager, there's a lot of this sort of expansionist behavior that's happening in these, like what we kind of call colonialism now. But I think that to love something, you can also point out where it has some places it could be better. And so, okay, so it's more than just being a fan saying, I love this thing forever and ever, but I also can say, this is really great, this is where it needs some work. So in the big book at the bottom is the handbook to Star Trek. It's actually an encyclopedia. And in there are hundreds of articles on all of the series. And the people who created that book are just amazing scholars and wonderful folks. And they talk about everything in the show, from fan cultures to problems with diversity in some of the early series, everything. And so something like that can kind of highlight all the work scholars do.
All right. Any final questions? Yeah.
What future projects are you working on? Anything related to Star Trek or other pop culture?
Yes. I have an article on Star Trek, hopefully coming out soon, a new piece. I am writing the last chapter to my book. So my book ends with season 4 of Discovery. Discovery went on to season 5. Pardon me. And so I'm writing that chapter. Sorry, now I got a frog in my throat. And then I'm writing a book on The Witcher. That is my current project. Sorry. There's Sue, the wonderful librarian Sue. Thank you, Sue.
Famous. Okay, then how about a round of applause for Carey? Thank you. Thank you all.